All right, we're going to call the meeting to order. I'm going to declare the meeting open at 7:02 PM. I meant to 7:03 PM. We want to be accurate. At 7:03 PM, meeting is open. Currently present for the board, Associate Member Kevin Riley, regular members Rob Ken, John Lawler, Sherry Bates, Christine Hanley, myself, Roy Gardner. Also present remotely is regular member Lindy Snow. So we have minutes from February 7th.
Move to approve the minutes of February 7th as presented.
Second?
Okay, so that's a motion. Riley, second Ken, to approve the minutes of February 7th. Discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We'll show that as unanimous vote. A quick update on the stormwater management bylaw. Current plan is to go to town meeting with a new stormwater management bylaw, a greatly simplified bylaw, which will still require later adopting a set of rules and regulations. But the intent will be to simplify the bylaw in such a way that it better fits what the town of East Bridgewater needs than the bylaw that was originally adopted at a previous town meeting. Oversimplified a little, but for everyone's understanding, the intent of the revised bylaw in the revised rules and regulations will be to clearly define responsibilities for the individual boards, being Planning Board, Zoning Board of Appeals, Conservation Commission, and so forth, that the stormwater management approval process will be an integral part of their existing process for either action under wetlands protection in the context of conservation, the planning board in the context of special permits that are issued by the planning board and subdivision control, and potentially zoning board of appeals for any special permits that may be issued by zoning board of appeals, since there are some special permits under our current local zoning bylaw that are issued by the zoning board of appeals. Now, the final definition of that isn't going to be in the bylaw itself, but will fall out in the rules and regulations. But the intent is to make sure that the bylaw is structured in such a way that it allows those rules and regulations to be crafted and then adopted. So any questions on where we're attempting to get with that? Okay, future street acceptances. We've got a couple of street acceptances that we're looking at going to annual town meeting with. There's a minimum of one and hopefully two. We would like to be able to take Johnson Farm Lane, which was the subdivision in which the planning board seized the bond some 2 years ago now. The town then had the work done on the roadway to repair the roadway and repave it. We do have an as-built plan for that now, so we're looking at, I believe it's Elmwood Court, if that's correct, Dot, is the subdivision up off of West Street that's done, and we have an as-built and the selectmen have already got advice from town council to accept the roadway for laying out. We have an as-built plan for that as well. So what I'd like to do is to have the office send both of those as-built plans to the full board membership, and we'll put that on our agenda for next scheduled meeting, to have a discussion and vote on whether we're going to recommend acceptance of those two roadways to annual town meeting, provided that the selectmen decide that both of those will be on the annual town meeting warrant. I'm pretty sure as of today's date that Elmwood Court will be on annual town meeting warrant. The Johnson Farm Lane is still in the, let's call it the discovery process with town council in terms of what he needs to do to make sure he's got all of the legal documentation, laying out documents, and so on and so forth. So,
Will the Board of Selectmen have time to conduct their public hearings if we wait until April?
they don't need our information to do that.
Okay.
That public hearing is simply a public hearing on a vote to accept the layout of the roadway.
I just didn't want it.
Our recommendation is independent of that. And normally, we don't sign the Mylars until after we have a recommendation for what should be obvious reasons, but if we see a problem with that layout, then we don't want to have a signature on a plan that's going to potentially be recorded at the Registry of Deeds if we find something that needs to be addressed. And we haven't had an official time period for the board to fully review those documents as well as make a recommendation at town meeting. So that will all be done at our next meeting. So that should be one of the early agenda items on our next scheduled meeting. Next item on the agenda is the site plan for Rhino Capital. So I do want to point out on our agenda, that's actually listed under hearings. Technically, it's not a hearing. So it's just an agenda item. So if anyone has access or has seen our agenda, this is not, the Rhino Capital site plan is not a public hearing. It's an open meeting discussion. We already have had the public hearing for the special permit, which has been issued previously. So feel free to come up to the front table if you wish and
Yeah.
And just for everyone's information that's here tonight, that we did have let's call it a discussion at our previously scheduled meeting. We decided to go ahead and hold that discussion just for everyone's benefit that was here and for the benefit of anyone watching at home on TV, but we did not have a physical quorum present for that meeting. So at that point in time, we continued an informal discussion. So tonight, we're going to have a more formal discussion with we potentially have 7 votes that we can record, or at least 6. I guess technically the site plan's not a special permit, so again, we'll leave that issue for later discussion, but there are 6 regular members present, 5 physically in the room, and member Lindy Snow remotely. So if you would introduce yourselves as you speak and go forth.
So my name is Tyler Murphy with Rhino Capital. I'm the applicant.
Matt Keeley with VHB, traffic engineer.
Rob Pellegrini, local counsel. Now I'll introduce Scott Lindgren, who is the engineer of record with VHB.
Computer expert?
That's always a good sound when you hear that.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for doing the introductions, Tyler. We're here to have another conversation concerning the East Bridgewater warehouse development. I know we've been in front of you a few times. In this hearing, this meeting, informational meeting, we have some things that we're going to focus on, and one is specifically traffic, because I think that had the most questions still open at the time when we responded to the environmental partners letter, and Matt Keeley from my office is going to run through where we stand and some of the traffic items. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott. I just have a couple of slides that I want to go through, but before I jump into that, I just wanted to make a clarification. We were discussing earlier that there seemed to be a little bit of confusion about where trucks can and can't enter the site. So just wanted to clarify that what's in the study, our traffic study, is that trucks can turn right only out of the Route 18 driveway, and all other trucks will go through the Highland Street driveway. So no trucks entering via Route 18, and when they exit Route 18, it's only a right turn out.
Okay.
So just to update a few things where we're at. Last time we talked a little bit about the peer review that was done by environmental partners. So their comment letter on our traffic study was issued on the 28th of February. It was a comprehensive review. Some of the key topics of discussion were trip generation, parking, and traffic operations. We issued a formal response letter on March 7th, and to my knowledge, there are no outstanding comments as part of that process that would change any of the conclusions of the traffic study. So I think we're all generally on the same page about the impacts of the project. One of the outstanding items we talked about last time was the intersection of Route 18 and Highland Street, and we talked about the traffic signal timing changes potentially. Just wanted to give a little bit of a reminder from my first presentation that this intersection is planned to be reconstructed by MassDOT, and that's currently in the preliminary design phase. That would be a much more comprehensive reconstruction as opposed to just the minor signal timing improvements that we're talking about. So in terms of how we would go about recommending those signal timing changes, is we'd prepare a technical memorandum and submit it to MassDOT District 5. What it would include is some traffic operations analysis sort of with and without the timing changes. So it's a build conditions without mitigation versus a build conditions with mitigation. And then we would just provide an overall summary of what our recommendations would be. And this, all this would be funded by Rhino, and we would handle issuing that to MassDOT and following up with those communications. So in terms of,
So, just to make sure everyone understands that, and I was gonna ask that before you finish this part of the discussion, but, and I think you touched on it last time, but Rhino is willing to work jointly with MassDOT, including at least financial support to get that intersection redone to whatever MassDOT thinks it needs to be.
Yep.
Maybe jointly in combination with Rhino. So, okay, all right.
sounds right, Heather?
Yep.
Okay. So just where do we go from here in terms of next steps? So after we are finished with our local approvals here, we'll prepare our MassDOT access permit application for the Route 18 site driveway. That's a sort of a separate process once we have our approvals. And then we'll also prepare that signal timing memo and submit that to MassDOT District 5. So those are sort of our next hit list items once we're done with this local
So
process.
I'm kind of assuming from what you've already said that if MassDOT prefers that trucks not exit onto Route 18 at that location, is that an acceptable? And part of the reason for that is as it currently stands at that traffic light, traffic backs up beyond that driveway.
Yeah, so, Matt, if you don't mind me, so during the MEPA process, right, Mass DOT is part of that, and they take a look at the overall project. And so they've looked at the overall scope of the project from the standpoint of where are trucks entering and exiting, where are passenger vehicles entering and exiting, what's the overall flow, what's going on here, the kind of high-level overview, and then Matt provides all the detail behind that hours of operation and such. So they've already looked at that and felt comfortable with that and made comments on that. This is really specifically to focus on the intersection itself and pursue the signal timing change there. They're sort of past the point of, we do or don't want you to have trucks here, do or don't want you to have passenger vehicles here in the directions. They've gone past that phase at this point.
Correct.
Okay, so is the other landowner that has rights to use that driveway staying in close contact with you in terms of what his currently planned uses on his site are?
Yeah, so me and Mike Payton personally talk all the time, and I don't know if Mike's here tonight, I don't see him here, but yeah, Mike Payton and I talk weekly, essentially, and have been for, God, at least a year now. So he's certainly aware of our design, and we've sat down with him and gone through the entire proposal with him. He was actually here at one of the beginning hearings, but hasn't been here since.
Okay, but recently, since those beginning hearings on the special permit, he's at least tentatively been discussing with town officials about a fairly significant change in use on his site, which would dramatically change the traffic. So are you aware of those changes?
I am aware of them, yes. Whether, yes. See what the future
That's-
holds.
Well, at this point, that's like all of the things we're doing these days. Everything's based on market and what the market's going to do and where the market's going to go and all those kind of things. So everything is to some extent speculative. So, I mean, but that whole front piece is in a significant state of flux based on the feedback we've been getting recently. So,
Yeah. No, Mike's been great about communicating with
Okay.
us and letting us know. plays out.
So let's go back for a second to that easement, those easement rights up that way, okay? We talked last time about, I think the concerns of, sort of mixing traffic together from the two sites. And, I was of the understanding, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, that we were going to have all traffic, truck traffic, was going to exit and enter through Highland Street. And there was going to be nothing coming out onto Route 18 or entering from Route 18. I don't necessarily like the idea of, tractor trailers, going up and down that driveway, or down that driveway, I guess, to exit, given that you're presumably going to have at least some vehicles that are parked on the adjacent site backing into that way to get out of where they're parked. So, and as Chairman indicates, the sort of the sense is that there's a much different kind of use or uses planned for that site. So at what point do we get a concern on your part or anybody's part about overburdening that easement by way of, just a restaurant, potentially, sports center, all these other things? When does that become a concern vis-a-vis your site?
So Matt, let me, before I answer the question, let me just ask you a question so I'm clear. I think the law states you need 24 feet of clear to back up out of a space if it's going across lanes. Is that what the total number?
It's typically 24.
It's
feet,
24 feet, right? So that's about what those 2 lanes get you.
Yeah. Mhm.
Did they, in that law, rule, regulation, whatever it may be, do they view passenger vehicles differently than tractor trailers?
No, I mean, it's just the space that you need to make that.
So they
Turn.
don't delineate between what's coming on the path or, what's coming on the road.
No.
They just look at the total space.
Yeah, that's typically
Okay.
24 feet.
I just wanted to clarify because I don't know, all the regulations, but I did think it was 24 feet. So I think at the end of the day, what we try to do when we design these projects is we take the information that we have today, and the information that we have today doesn't lead us to a concern. I do understand that, the abutter may be proposing some other uses, but I can't personally say if those things are actually gonna happen or not, or to what degree they're gonna happen, or to what they're actually gonna be. So what we just try to do is look at the information we have available today, and just make the best decision that we can, that we think it makes sense. The pathway that we're exiting on, or the side of the road that we're exiting on, is the part that is on our parcel, so not using the reciprocal part of the easement. So we've chosen not to use that to try to lessen or diminish the amount of traffic on that road as much as possible, but still provide some flexibility. And that's how we kind of came to that decision.
And one other thing, just a reminder that we are going to be doing a transportation monitoring program, so that this is something we're definitely going to keep an eye on in the future when we do future counts to verify what we have in our study.
Okay, and along the lines of the questions that Member Riley was asking, the abutter will have to come back to the planning board for a revised special permit anyway. The expectation is, if there's gonna be a business there that would be a relatively high turnover, like a restaurant, then there's a very high probability we'll require those spaces that would be backing out into that driveway area to be moved. Because we don't want to see, big difference between a 100-plus seat restaurant and a storage facility, or a contractor storage facility.
Absolutely, and I think that, one thing that, just speaking high level in general, when you look at restaurants and things of that nature, when you start changing uses like that, and then you start getting into, how much parking do they need, depending on how big it is, and all the square footage calculations, you start to say, well, is the building as proposed even in the right place altogether? And so then all of a sudden the building changes shape, and now those spaces aren't there anymore. So it's just, obviously, as you get into these things and you start changing uses, you start to look
So
back at, did what I propose actually make sense? And so things start to change.
So you've got the same questions we're gonna have, is the building in the right place, and is oriented correctly if that's gonna be a different kind of use, so, okay.
And I obviously don't wanna speak
Yes.
for Mike, but.
Yep, that's fine. That's fine. I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that this is going to be an ongoing process, and he may finally get around to what he's going to do before your building is done, given the timelines involved in building a building of that size and working on a site of that size. So we want to make sure we keep the chain of communication open between all of the parties throughout the whole process, so that at the point we get to the end, we're satisfied that we've done our best to make that traffic as reasonable as possible and as safe as possible, so, okay.
That and maybe the part that Matt and Tyler said might address your concern is that they're making sure that the trucks are traveling on Rhino's property, not on the part of the easement that's on the abutter's property. I think that.
How
that
are we
was
gonna
it.
do that, Rob?
The lot line,
Yeah, well, yeah, but I think it's what Matt said, which is there's a monitoring program after the fact, once the building's up and running.
So just for clarity, for everyone's clarity, we're talking about the access off of Route 18, which in the past, and for people in town would know, is what was originally the access to Funway in the rear. Okay, now Funway owned that property. They owned roughly, pretty close to 50% of that access way. Mr. Payton owned roughly 50% of the access way, so if you would divide that up and put a center line down it, it's not exact, but it's fairly close to the outbound traffic coming off that site would be on the Rhino Capital property. The inbound traffic would be on the Payton half of the road, if you would. And again, that's not to an engineering, finality, but it's very close to that from the original plans, which we saw back when we did F1 some decade or so ago. It's almost a 50-50 split. So effectively, outgoing traffic would almost by definition have to be on Rhino's property, because that side, the outgoing side of that property is Rhino's property.
Correct.
And, in the,
I suppose that begs the question of how that access way is going to be developed and marked, right? I mean, if you're talking a 24-foot way, and we're paving the whole length of it, let's split it in half, we got a 12-footer. How many tractor-trailer drivers do you know that are gonna stay in that 12 feet on the right-hand side?
And I don't know, I'd have to look at the plan, I assume it was at 30.
It's actually wider than that. It's wider than
It's
24
wider
feet.
than that, yeah. I was just
Has
saying that
some-
the minimum is 24.
yeah, minimum
For
24.
to have a vehicle that backs up out of a space.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think,
across 2 lanes.
I think Mr. Murphy's, conversation about the redesign and, a new use, as a civil engineer, the land development engineer that comes in front of you is looking at the use, looking at the traffic volumes, will understand the nature of, where those parking spaces should go versus not go, and how they interact with a shared, driveway. I think that not to speak to the butters design, but there might be some changes that will come forth. That's just something that I know I would look at. But, I think that's something that's worth unknown to us right now of what that might be, but I think it should be, expected that they
It's
be
still,
looking
as
at
I
that.
tried to say, when I started discussing that point, it's still a bit speculative at this point. There's been nothing formally filed yet. But we have had some preliminary discussions with both potential tenant as well as with Mr. Payton about that, so.
Because it's a domino effect item, then you get into
Yeah.
wastewater, and it just, then
Yeah,
the whole,
no,
the whole
the whole thing
becomes-
kind of cascades up, so,
Yes.
okay. Anyone else on the board have any?
Do we have a copy of the easement agreement between the two properties?
I don't know if the town has,
I
we
don't
can
know
provide
if
it.
the town has I don't
We can
believe
provide
we
it.
submitted it as part of the documentation to
We can
to
check.
the board.
I'm pretty sure it was in one of the significant amounts of documentation that was submitted.
It was or was not?
It was.
Yeah, it's recorded at the registry.
At the registry.
Yeah.
originally signed in 2003 or 2004 when F1 was being permitted. Quite a while back now. But I have seen it because I know it's been recorded. I know I looked at it when we were acting on the F1 special permit back then, so.
And in this, particular instance, the easement would be, more relevant for Mike than for us, because we're operating on our half of the property, but something we can certainly go back and verify and see what's there.
I'd like to take a look at it as part of this proposal. Not comfortable with the backing out of the traffic with the high-intensity use of the warehouse, and that we'd want, as part of our approval, to consider making sure that that's a safe environment for backing up the cars, into the roadway. I think that it would probably, no matter what the use, indicate that we would probably need to have some adjustments on the neighboring property and how they use that site.
Or alternately, require the applicant who's gonna change the use in the front property to remove those spaces, so there is no
Exactly.
backing out into the
Right.
roadway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not against, the proposal going forward. I would just want to make sure
Yeah.
that we have those conditions in place as part of an approval.
Just to clarify what number of trucks we're talking about that would be coming out that way, we had it at 2 or 3 in the peak hour, so only 2 or 3 truck trips on that stretch of the driveway
Yeah.
during the peak hour, so it's not gonna be a heavy truck volume, that's gonna be making that move.
It's still, not a safe condition to have cars backing into a roadway when you have 18-wheelers.
Agreed.
As part of the site design, looking at the whole picture, as you know, the wetland line is right on the edge of the existing roadway.
Yeah,
And we're just not able to change the access that the applicant has because we cannot move to drive any further into the wetland obviously. So the access lane is right where it is existing.
And
We'll just keep that issue on the table going forward as something that we want to keep an eye on as the build-out on your site ramps up and finishes, and whatever happens on the other side over that next year or two becomes clearer in terms of what they're gonna come back and actually request the revised permit for.
Because we certainly, I think we all understand the concern, but again, back to my original point, we can only make design decisions based on things that we know or things that are
Yes.
reasonably
Yep.
able to be predicted. And, the condition that you're discussing isn't from our site. I understand that the trucks are coming from our site, but the backup condition of a use we can't predict is really an abutter site design issue. And I agree with it.
So how many, we said three trips per hour, peak hours, what are we talking about per day? So we're talking about 25 trips a day, is that what we're anticipating, something like that?
Probably something like that, yeah. Sounds about right.
Okay, why don't we
Sure.
continue on?
Continue on. I think the next slide is just to identify something that had come up in the past hearing. We wanted to make sure that it was noted and that our plans are revised to show that there's a location for a second dumpster pad location. If you know, we have 2 dumpster pad locations here on the left-hand side for the one tenant option where the whole facility would have one dumpster location. I think the question came up, if there was a second tenant, how would that function? And we're identifying 2 additional dumpster locations if that condition does take place for the warehouse facility. Anticipating an original proposal, obviously, that this would be a one tenant warehouse facility. But the question did come up at the board about a second tenant, and we wanted to make sure that we identified that if this was the case, that there is a place for trash pickup and removal. So that's what that this slide shows everybody. And then lastly, let's bring it back to Tyler here to talk a little bit about some conclusion comments of our presentation.
Yeah, so thank you, Scott. I just wanted to sort of wrap up the presentation by recapping some of the items that we've talked about during informal and formal hearings over these past months. So first of all, I did want to thank Scott, you personally, and VHB as a whole. Greg Lombardo Design, who's done a fantastic job. All our consultants have been really great throughout this and come up with a really compelling design. Designing a site of this size is certainly not easy, so I wanted to thank you guys. Just to get into some of the items here, the paragraph that's up there is just a copy and paste from the zoning code, kind of relating to the fabric and the fit-in. So this is something that was really more discussed in December and just highlighted a couple of items. So provide locations for industrial uses, supply employment and capital investment. We have the ability to supply up to 333 jobs here on the capital investment. As we discussed in December, somewhere in the range of about $35 million to construct a facility of this size. Some of the other items I thought were important to note were we have extremely limited visibility from public roadways, in part to a compelling landscape design, but also in part because of just the natural landscape that's out there today. Have the ability to stimulate local businesses, create a critical parcel to connect to future sewer and roadways that the town has planned. Can unlock some untapped tax income. In December, we estimated that between $500,000 and $600,000 per year. That also is coupled with a low draw on town services. The site will become occupied, maintained, and safe. There actually was a break-in during this process where they broke into the garage and stole all of the go-karts and go-kart related equipment out of there. So I think, not specific to this site in general, any occupied and active site is better than a not occupied and an unactive site as a general note. And traffic, not to go too far back into what Matt said, but I think this creates a great avenue and platform to pursue the intersection improvements that we discussed. And as part of the state MEPA process, we did look at alternate uses that yielded far higher trip counts. That was office use and mixed use development yielded far higher trip counts. From the environmental perspective, we're installing 4,590 new plants with seasonal bloom and pollinators, providing stormwater management in accordance with Mass DEP stormwater standards. We're remove the storage of the gasoline, oil, and other liquids from the racing purposes. And the roof is being constructed to support solar. We're also providing EV charging stations here. So given the project benefits discussed, we believe this proposal meets the 5 site plan standards listed in section 13 of the zoning bylaw. I'll just breeze over those quickly, which are that all dimensional requirements are met, sufficient parking is provided, safe and adequate egress is provided, the methods for storage and disposal of waste are acceptable, and that proposed methods to control surface water drainage are acceptable. And of course, that all these plans are designed by a professional site engineer. When I was leaving here last week, I ran into John Haynes, so I thought I saw here, hi John, and realized that it's been a year, about a year, since we were meeting with him back at the building over on Dean Place and discussing sort of, the potential sewer and roadways and things of that nature. And we've just had a great opportunity here over the past year to learn about the town and work with a lot of various different parties and abutters and other things of that nature. So in closing, and on behalf of Rhino Capital and our consultants, I wanted to thank the board for their guidance throughout this process and hope that we have the opportunity to do this project and have a great asset for the town of East Bridgewater. So thank you.
Thank you all.
And I just want to say that we're obviously we're here for any additional comments or questions that you might have to pose to us. And
So I'll
thank
start
you
with
as
the
well.
board here. Any board members have any questions they want to ask?
Is any part of this project going to be put forth for acceptance by the town as far as the roadways go?
So, you want to take?
So let me
Process on that?
try and address that issue, so.
In terms of,
As of right now, and I mentioned this at our informal meeting, I should mention it again in the formal meeting, there is yet another hearing to be held, and that is the hearing to abandon the subdivision or rescind the subdivision approval for the previous subdivision that was actually on that same parcel of land that was approved back, I believe, was in the 1990s. Part of that rescission is going to have to provide an access way to the only parcel of land that would have been accessed off that subdivision that currently is not in Rhino Capital's ownership. And I believe it's a Bradshaw property. Is it Bradshaw or Bradford?
Bradley.
Bradley, I'm sorry. The Bradley property. Now, in addition to that, which we have to talk over time, there was, and still is, a potential for a sewer line to come down from the city of Brockton, of which we would need to make a connection down to get to Highland Street. Again, some speculation here, and I hate to do this at this point, but there are some parcels of property further up as you head up towards Whitman that we would like to see a roadway run roughly on those property lines. Some of that land is owned currently by the town of East Bridgewater. The idea would be, at least potentially, that the road that accesses the other lot there be enough along the perimeter of the lot line such that that could be continued further north until it gets almost to the Whitman line. That's all gonna be part of the discussion, which we plan on having an informal discussion very shortly. I am gonna ask during that informal discussion that we get a preliminary plan that can be reviewed by the parties being obviously Rhino, the town, and Bradford. Bradley, I'm sorry.
And we had worked initially with Weston and Sampson, I think, as the town's engineer on that.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah.
And just recently corresponded and provided them our AutoCAD plans for the development, so they could continue their work on the sewer planning.
Yeah, and we took some of the sketches for roadways and then the sewer, in our initial presentation. We do have a plan, we can provide it again. It shows where the sewer would go across our site as well as the roadways where they could connect to show that if those do come in the future, that it's a logical path and a reasonable constructible path with minimal disturbance to the site. I think there's only like one road cut, maybe two.
Depending on the routing.
Yeah,
It'll
I
be
mean, it's like a typical
obviously
trenching
some
exercise.
Trenching
Yes.
type
Yeah,
exercise.
okay. So
The
does
building's
that,
on
does that answer the question? At least as best as we can answer it right now?
At this time, yeah.
Anyone else on the board? Is there anyone in the room who has a question or comments? I'll make a comment just for the record here that in terms of all of the fire safety things, Rhino Capital has already indicated they're more than willing to construct whatever needed for fire hydrants, locations of fire hydrants, and all those kind of things, and that is part of the package that they've presented to us. The final negotiations, if you will, for all of those, as always, the planning board will defer to the fire department and the deputy fire chief, who's the safety officer at the fire department. So, and I know you've already had an ongoing discussion, multiple discussions with that, so I don't think that there's any issues there at all. I know you've been talking to John Haynes in the DPW and the water department in terms of what's there, what needs to be there, and how it needs to get done, so I think all of those things are covered. So I think, at this point, I think that's probably all we have. Is anyone, so I'll say at this point, thank you very much for your input and your due diligence in answering all our questions to date. I expect probably a little bit later on, we will very potentially take a vote on the site plan approval for the record, depending on what the body of the board wants to do about that. So you're more than welcome to stay. I don't think the meeting is gonna run too much longer for the on-agenda items, so you're more than welcome to hang around if you wish, till we get to the... And just for your information, this is the way we usually do that. When we have hearings or specific items of which they could potentially end up with a decision that has some conditions in it, we'll take that at the end of the meeting and go through the other agenda items as quickly as we can and get back to that. Okay?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. All right, so we've got a couple of things on the agenda. We already briefly discussed the Elmwood Court layout. As I said, we'll have that on the agenda, early on the agenda for our next meeting. 8 Magnolia Road, 8
March 7th approved.
Right to it.
Sorry.
8 Magnolia Road. 8 Magnolia Road, Magnolia Road is one of the roads in a over 55 planned open space residential community. 8 Magnolia Road, if my memory serves me correctly from earlier this afternoon. Even though my memory has been overloaded all day today with planning board business.
Magnolia Circle. I wrote it on the agenda wrong.
I think you're right, it is Magnolia Circle. In any case, it's the last remaining home site. We had a working agreement with the owners there that at such time as the final manufactured home was removed, given the current state of that project, we would release that lot. That final manufactured home has now been removed from the site. The legal owner of that home site is ready to potentially very shortly apply for a building permit, but we have a covenant on those home sites, and that 8 Magnolia Circle has not been released yet. So we do have, somewhere up here, a document entitled Final Home Site and Covenant Release for us to, yes, to potentially sign tonight. And we've adopted a slightly different policy with our covenant releases now, that if it's the last parcel, in this case, it's referred to as a home site because it's in a cluster over 55 development, which has a privately owned roadway, so. But we're using the word final to make it clear that when people searching at the Registry of Deeds find this document, they realize it's the last one. Because we've had a bunch of, as banks get more due diligence in place on mortgages, finding covenants where they don't like the wording of the release forms that have been recorded at the registry. So we're gonna do our best to fix that, so we don't have to file confirming releases in the future, but in any case, at this point in time, we could entertain a motion to sign the final home site and covenant release for the entity entitled Meadowbrook Adult Retirement Community, and that was originally dated June 22nd, 1998, last revised June 9th, 2003. So if I could have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
So we've got a motion, Ken, do we have a second?
Second?
Okay, we've got a motion, Ken, second Hanley. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And we'll show that as a unanimous vote of, we'll call it all 6 regular members present and voting. And that includes Lindy Snow, if that's, is your vote yes, Lindy?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'm gonna sign it here and pass it around while we'll continue our other discussions here. Next item on the agenda is 126, 130 Franklin Street. We have the final revised plan from that special permit issuance. We're beyond the 21-day appeal period, so those plans are ready to be endorsed. So we can entertain a motion to endorse those plans. Is a copy of that plan?
I don't see it.
Voted?
It's in
I didn't see it either.
those.
Okay, that's fine.
I'd make that motion to approve the plan.
Okay, that's a motion, Riley. Do you have a second?
Second.
That's That's a motion, Riley, second Lawler, to endorse the special permit plan for 126, 130 Franklin Street. Discussion. I do have one quick question. Is the either an applicant's representative or the engineer himself present? Okay. Could you please come up to the front for just 1 second?
Hi, Kyle Devenish, Outback Engineering.
Thank you. So there's one remaining question, which technically I guess we can say is not the purview of the planning board, but we do want to make it aware that it's still imperative that the issue of the gas line that supposedly runs diagonally across that property to an adjacent residential home gets resolved somehow.
Yes, I believe it's
You're
in.
fully aware of that.
I believe it's in the standards of, or order of conditions or approval that you had written up, that it's in,
Right.
addressed in writing, I believe.
'Cause I've attempted to directly talk to the gas company, and I have talked to people there twice, and at both times, they've indicated that in no case would they ever allow a gas line to traverse individual single-family homes to get to an adjacent single-family home.
We're in the same boat there.
So, we don't know how it got there. That's pretty clear, because the gas company won't acknowledge that they ever put it there.
Yes,
There clearly is a gas meter on the house that's next to that property.
yes.
The
I
gas
spoke with
co-
the homeowner there as well.
The gas company had to put that meter there. So, I'll leave it at that, but just be aware that we know that there is a gas line somewhere that runs diagonally across that property,
Yes,
and it almost has to be through the middle of the area that would be excavated and built on, so,
yes.
all right. So given that, any further discussion on the motion to endorse the plans? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And we will show that as a unanimous vote of all 7 members present and voting, and that does include a vote from Associate Member Riley, since this is a special permit application. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I would ask the members, but before we leave tonight, if we could endorse those plans after the meeting closes. So I guess the FYI is that Tower Heights Phase 4 has received the approval for the Board of Selectmen for the proposed street lighting at this development. Based on my understanding of how that currently works, that is an exclusive jurisdiction these days of the Board of Selectmen. They have an agreement that's jointly signed between the developer and the Board of Selectmen that the developer will pay for the lights. The selectmen have defined what type of lights will be there, and that the selectmen will take over responsibility of the bill associated with those lights at such time as the roadway is accepted as a public way. All right, so I don't think we need to discuss the establishing fees. We know that that's an ongoing issue that we have to try and resolve. Victory Lane streetlights. We have asked the gentleman who's currently acting on behalf of the developer there for an update as to the as-built plan, as well as where we stand for the streetlight situation there. I know he was advised to talk to the Board of Selectmen's office, given the current policy that's been adopted, which is relatively recent. I don't believe we've heard back at this point.
Not until I take that.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, do we need to take a vote on Knights Estates to continue that public hearing until May 2nd?
We do have a written request to do that, right?
Request from the
So,
applicant.
to follow proper procedure, we probably ought to record a vote. Knights Estates, which is the subdivision which enters from 678 East Street in Brockton, in which all of the access way off the public way is in the city of Brockton, but at least all but one of the lots, and maybe all of the lots, are actually in the town of East Bridgewater. They've officially in writing requested a continuation until Monday, May 2nd, as they're still attempting to negotiate with the city of Brockton the conditions that they would have to work with in Brockton to get both wastewater treatment and potable water, which is only available from the city of Brockton. So if we can entertain a motion to accept that request, a continuance until Monday, May 2nd.
So moved.
Okay, so that's a motion. Bates, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Second, Ken. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And we'll show that as 6 in favor, none opposed, with Associate Member Riley abstaining, since this is a subdivision, not a special permit. Okay? Is there anyone else in the room before we get back to Rhino Partners on their project and the site plan approval? Is there anyone else in the room that has business they'd like to discuss? Okay, so I guess we're back to the site plan approval from Rhino Partners. So I believe at this point, we're ready to entertain a motion for site plan approval of the site plan package that's been submitted by Rhino Partners.
Make a motion.
So we've got a motion, Lawler.
We're gonna talk about conditions first?
As part of the motion, yes.
I'll second the motion.
All right, we have a second to the motion by Member Riley, Associate Member Riley. So technically speaking, after rethinking what this really is, this is standard business under the planning board. It's not technically speaking action under the 2 sections of Massachusetts general law in which the responsibility of the associate members are defined clearly and codified in the law. It's not technically action under subdivision control or action under the special permit section 9, as it's site plan approval at this point. So we've got a motion and a second. I think I'll start with some conditions to begin with, and then we can go around the board and see what other things we need to add. Condition 1 is that the applicant provide the planning board at all times with updated information from Mass Highway as they receive that information, as well as any potentially revisions that would be required based on agreements reached with Mass Highway as part of the Mass Highway permitting process. And I would add that should include whatever the recommendations are for timing on the lights, or the retiming of the lights, as well as reconfiguration of the intersection at Highland Street and Route 18. I'll add, condition 2 is that to some extent this site plan has to be contingent on the approval to rescind the prior subdivision which is underlying the site. That's a statutory issue that I think is more than easily covered, hopefully. Because with a third-party land having access to that way that was approved under subdivision control, until that issue is addressed, the site plan is still a, sorry, go ahead.
I think it's modified, but if it makes you feel more comfortable, you could say rescind or modify.
Why don't we do that? Okay. Why don't we use the word rescind or modify in terms of the action we're going to take on the subdivision approval? I guess Attorney Pellegrini, you're probably correct. It probably should say modify, since there is an existing subdivision with access to Highland Street that enters onto the Rhino property. So I guess more technically it would be to modify that subdivision. All right, those are the 2 conditions that I think need to be on there to begin with. Any others, feel free.
So those would be special conditions that are in addition to the 5 standard conditions in our site plan review
Yes.
approval. Okay. So I would look for the following. 3, special condition 3. The paved travel lane to the side and rear of the building shall be clearly marked and enforced as no parking, so as to permit fire department access, and that area should be also kept clear of any stored items or materials and all debris. Special condition 4, all truck I'll do it this way, and we'll see where we go with it. All truck traffic entering and exiting the site shall do so by way of the Highland Street driveway, and no truck traffic shall be permitted to use the North Bedford Street Route 18 driveway. Special condition 5, to the greatest extent possible, employees working on the premises shall utilize the Highland Street driveway for access and egress purposes. Special condition 6, the owner and/or applicant shall install any necessary signage to assure compliance with the foregoing 3 conditions. Special condition 7, screened plantings of appropriate sizes shall be installed on the site as per the landscape plans submitted by the applicant, with particular emphasis on screening of the trailer parking area adjacent to the Highland Street entrance. Special condition 7, or 8, next one anyway. The existing sound wall shall remain on the premises at its present location. Special condition 8, that the applicant agrees to fund the traffic operations analysis through the Mass Department of Transportation for the Highland Street, North Bedford Street intersection, cooperate with all recommendations of Mass DOT with regard to that intersection and the traffic in the area. And finally, that the maintenance of the driveway easement coming off of Route 18 shall be equitably apportioned between the applicant and the abutter.
Okay, and Kevin, do you have the, does that have the standard conditions, the 5 standard
Yep.
conditions on it as well?
That's a copy of the book.
So for the record, I'm gonna read what we consider our 5 standard conditions for a site plan approval. So number 1 is the details contained in the above referenced plan shall be considered to permanently regulate development and use of the subject property. No alterations to same or to the plan itself or to the conditions as listed herein will be allowed without prior written submission and approval by the planning board. Item 2, owner or applicant shall provide the planning board with copies of any and all orders of conditions as issued by the appropriate agency and recorded by the owner applicant pursuant to the Wetlands Protection Act. Any changes to the site plan required under the order of conditions shall be presented to the planning board by the applicant for review and approval, or for the possible review and approval as a modification to the site plan. The planning board reserves the right to negotiate with the issuing authority to incorporate modifications in the order of conditions that may be deemed appropriate by the planning board and its consultant. The owner applicant shall provide the planning board with copies of any stormwater management permits as issued by the appropriate agency and recorded by the applicant. Any modifications, it's the same language as the previous paragraph, need to come back to the planning board. This approval does not change any existing land use constraints or limitations on the premises. And 5, the approval should take effect only after the endorsed plan has been recorded at the Plymouth County Registry of Deeds, Registry District of the Land Court, and evidence of the recording has been provided to the board. The recording shall include a copy of this approval letter. So, we okay for now?
Since this is not a public hearing, could we have a short dialogue on one of your conditions?
You certainly may.
I bet I know which one.
Yeah, I understand completely where you're going with this and your concerns. However, what I was attempting to explain is there's both a recorded easement and they're out only, which is really a maximum of three trucks during the peak hour, is occurring entirely on their property unless somebody was violating the rules of the road and driving on the wrong side of the street. So I'm wondering if you have any daylight on that particular issue. We certainly don't want to get in the way of what the future plans might be for the land, but essentially that condition sounds like you're telling them that they can't drive on their own property. That's the only reason I can show you the lot line on the plans that were submitted. And I did find the easement, which I could show you the actual language.
Is that an easement from 2006? Is that correct?
I think it's from prior to that, it's 1999. I think you might be reading from the easement that was granted during the approval of the subdivision roadway, which is gonna be modified. I can give it to you, it has the recording information on it and
Yeah,
everything.
either that or just give me the recording information, Robert's fine.
So, it's, well, here, it's easier for you to read off of it. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, all these reviewing.
Yes.
What was approved for Mr. Payton's site? What is his, because that was happened before I came on. It was approved for,
What we've approved previously for the Peyton site was 3 buildings described as effectively empty contractor bays, and the actual division of those contractor bays in terms of internal sizing will be determined as they're leased out to contractors. The idea of the parking in front of that building was originally intended to simply be that the expectation is that some of those contractors are gonna probably have a small office with an employee or 2 in them. That would be all-day parking for the employee, or potentially all-day parking for, if the contractor bay has an electrician's truck or whatever, that they don't take home with them. And the incoming and outgoing traffic would be extremely minimal at that site.
I think that would be how I'd base my decision on this issue is, that's what we have in front of us. We haven't had anything different from Mr. Payton.
Not officially, that's correct.
So I think that's what we should probably base these conditions on, in my opinion. We don't know what's gonna happen. I mean,
Again, as I said earlier, it's
We know-
speculation to some extent, so.
so we know what's been approved, we know what the planning board has approved. Based on that, it'll be minimal impact, in my opinion, to trucks coming out of that driveway.
But his approval isn't contingent on him just doing contractor bays
Yes, it
and
is.
low-use
Yes,
site?
it is.
It is?
If he does anything other than contractor bays, he has to refile with the planning board for a modification of his special permit.
Okay,
And
so that's the only use that he can use it for?
that's what he was approved for, yes. And as you might expect, that's the one that has the least less density of parking requirements and a lot of other things. So if he comes back with what clearly is at least potentially a far more intensive use with far more traffic on an hourly basis, then that will dramatically change the overall, well, both the traffic flow as well as the potential parking layout. It may actually change the location of a building. Because the current building locations don't fit, well, one man's opinion, the current building locations don't fit a 120-seat restaurant.
Plus you have 3 buildings. Right?
Right.
3 buildings were approved.
Yeah, there'd be 2 other buildings there that also don't fit having a restaurant in the front building with another building directly adjacent to it. The major parking is out in between the 2 buildings. It's not where the restaurant building would be, according to what we've seen. So this-
I do just wanna add that these are good people and they're respecting his property rights here. The easement that I just handed you says, he certainly allowed to use their portion of the property, but he can't impede them from using their portion of the property. Same thing goes for Rhino, but they made the effort of saying, hey, we're not even gonna drive on your side of it. We're gonna stay on our property. So I think they went the extra mile. I'm just trying to ask for some middle ground on that.
Yeah, look, I absolutely think that, the way this thing has been laid out and presented and so forth is just great. I no issues with that. from the very start, I think you guys recall, that was one of my biggest concerns, was that traffic at that intersection, or that driveway, because, as I say, I live nearby, and I know what that is. I guess, apropos of what Rob Ken had just said, I can look at it from the perspective of, well, it's only 25 trucks a day, what are we really giving up? That's the other perspective, but, I guess I say, I throw that condition to the board if they wanna have, I'm not, it's, I think, to the extent that the trucks are allowed to come through there, in exiting the property, I think that's going to be more of an impact upon what happens in terms of anything that the abutter might want to do, and what approval he will get for rearrangement of those buildings or rearranging the uses. So, I think that less affects you guys in that sense than it does him. So, I defer on that to the majority.
So what we want to do is, how about if we add language that says no less than 24 months from now, we'll revisit that condition based on what the applicant has applied for the adjacent parcel? What I would like to see is that there be no cars backing directly into what I consider a roadway. Effectively, that's a roadway. There's no way to work around that.
I'm fine with it. The part that I wasn't comfortable with is not letting Rhino use what's gonna be Rhino's land. It just
To
didn't.
a certain degree, Rod. It's obviously,
That's-
cars and other things are free to go up and, down there and whatever, so.
That's part of what we have to do as a board, to try and define what we consider the best possible way to make sure that safe access and egress is provided to all of those parcels.
Okay, so what you're saying is in 24 months you'll review what?
I think what.
We'll revisit that condition to
We have
see
at
if-
least a sense of what
Yeah.
the other party is going to do. And if trucks are now being allowed, if that condition, that part of that condition is being removed, am I reading you right, Roy?
Yes.
And then within 24 months, we'd see how, what the plans are and how that would work, and if
Okay.
necessary, have to rethink it.
That would be like a minor modification.
Minor modification to the approval.
I would consider that very minor modification, actually. Yes.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's 24 months. If they don't come forward with their proposal, maybe it's a time frame that, upon the neighboring property coming forward with a change in use or a proposal, that it's reviewed at that time. So it gives you the ability to come back. What if he comes back in 36 months?
Well, they're building buildings right now there, so he'll be back before that, I can guarantee you, because you're gonna wanna put something in the building that's built already. Because there is one building up at this point, I believe. Pretty much fully constructed, at least externally. I don't know about internally, but. So he will be back relatively shortly, I believe. Because the indication is that Peyton, or one of Peyton's companies, it's probably one of Peyton's companies. No one does anything in their own name, technically speaking, these days in the business world, but he has a small athletic complex in another site in town that's already badly overloaded and overutilized, and he needs to move. He's already determined that, so he was pretty clear in a previous informal discussion we had with him. So at some point, he's got to come back and formally file for that. So that is, my understanding, going to be pretty quickly, because I believe that's the building that's up. So at that point, we can revisit that whole. Okay?
Take what we can get.
All right, so we'll put a review at the, not later than 24 months from today, as part of that,
So we would amend that condition to say that only truck traffic exiting southbound onto Route 18 shall be entitled to use that driveway.
When,
do you want to put that way now?
I think we're saying that we will give the applicant the ability to come back to us and talk to us in 24 months.
So we're saying we're gonna keep the
see.
prohibition?
The prohibition for that amount of time, yep, until,
The time period not to exceed 24 months until,
I was being a nice guy, I was going in the other direction.
all right, so are we okay with only allowing truck traffic out that roadway to Route 18 with the right turn only at the entrance with Route 18? How many members are okay with that? We all okay with that?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
I can get that.
All right, so we'll go with that.
With what?
And,
Southbound exit only.
Southbound exit only, right turn on at Route 18, which I believe is,
And we'll review, that's what will be reviewed when,
Thank you. That's really.
so we'll leave it that way, and then we will review that in 24 months
Okay,
based on what's going on in the adjacent site.
that's awesome. Thanks.
I think all of us,
I'm not understanding.
Yeah, I think that was backwards as well.
So,
So
so what
the-
is the condition?
the
that we're
condition now
putting?
is to restrict
so there'll be,
truck traffic exiting to be right turn only on Route 18, southbound, if you will, if you prefer southbound.
so there's
And we
no
will-
truck traffic will enter through the Route 18 driveway.
Right.
Truck traffic may only exit through
Yeah, I
that and
think
only
that's-
making a right
That's what it
turn.
was all along, right?
Yeah,
That's not, well, as I said before, I was of the understanding that they weren't using that driveway at all for truck traffic.
Oh, okay.
So, that's where,
so how do you get into the limiting it if it's an issue in the future? What are you saying? In 24 months, we'll re-review it, but only when the applicant comes back? Will we make it more restrictive?
No,
Or
what we said
make
is,
it less restrictive?
no less than 24 months, we'll review that based on the applicant's proposal for the adjacent site. Technically, it's a stretch, but technically, the applicant has a right to back out into that roadway the way his plan has been currently approved. If he's gonna change that plan, we're gonna remove that. If we remove that, then truck traffic on that site's not an issue, so that condition can remain the way it is.
Assuming everything goes to plan, will it be operational in 24 months?
It's pushing it, but it's possible, yes.
And my second question, the question of, is it a legal question that makes you uncomfortable restricting that road? Or is it an operational issue as well, or both?
We probably
It's-
will give you a different answer.
I think the answer is both.
Yeah. You know, legal, I can read the easement and, operational.
Yeah.
It's,
Okay, so to begin with, we're okay with allowing the right turns southbound on Route 18, exiting from that access egress way, the easement access egress way.
Yeah.
We will have further discussions, no less than 24 months from now, when we see the final proposal from the adjacent property owner, who also has mutual access egress rights based on his easement.
and let's maybe throw another little curveball in there, and that is that, that be allowed provided the volume of traffic is consistent with the representations made by the applicant. That is, that no more than 25 are gonna be exiting there a day. So, I mean, that, I think, protects us in a certain respect. And I think does it give you guys enough?
Just
It's fine.
checking on the number.
Do Do you wanna just say consistent with the traffic study submitted to the town?
No.
That's the study that they submitted.
That's what you would want, right? I mean,
Consist, you guys have represented to me, you answered the direct question, 25 was a good number.
Okay, yeah, I just figured you would want.
Well, I
You
mean, I
know,
don't, to
that
the extent
was-
that there's a lesser number in that traffic study, sure, we'll take that. I'll take that, but
You're
25.
saying 25 is okay.
All right, we got all of that? So all those in favor of the motion to approve the site plan for Rhino Capital at 798 North Bedford Street rear, say aye.
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 So, all those opposed? So I think we'll show that as a vote of 7 in favor, none opposed, unanimous, including the vote of Associate Member Kevin Riley.
Thanks, everybody. Pleasure. Thank you. Do you wanna keep? Okay.
I'll pull it off the.
Okay, anyone else have anything for us? Any board members, any questions? You got anything significant we forgot, Dot?
I think I left in front of you was the annual report for the planning board. It might be beside your microphone. I didn't know if you wanted to pass it up or not.
Planning board did wonderful things in 2021.
So I'll read this, it's pretty short and to the point, so it's a report of the planning board to the Honorable Board of Selectmen, citizens of East Bridgewater. Board Annual Report for 2021. Board meetings were held on the first and third evening of each month, 7 PM. Town office building meetings are held in the large conference room on the second floor. Add the word floor after second. Just as, at the large conference room on the second.
Okay, we'll have to add in floor.
Important edit. During 2021 calendar year, the board conducted several public hearings for subdivisions and special permits. Approved a 5-lot subdivision, residential subdivision off Captain's Way. That needs to be fixed as well, because it says off Central Street,
Okay. Oh, it should say Captain's Way.
off Captain's Way.
The other one's off Central Street.
Well, it says off Captain's Way, off Central Street. And construction started with Daisy Lane Estates, a 15-lot subdivision. It should say previously approved. We are currently in the process of an 8-lot residential subdivision off 678 East Street, Brockton, and reviewed a 20-lot preliminary residential subdivision plan off Central Street. We also reviewed the usual Form A plans and course site plan reviews. And of course, site plan reviews. The board welcomed new members Sherry Bates and Rob Ken, newest members to the planning board, and said goodbye to Sheila Savoy Glidden, associate member. The board has completed update of the rules of the subdivision rules and regulations, which had last been updated in 1991. The board would like to thank Patrick Franey, building inspector, Ellen McKenzie, and Candy Boyle, and Dot Simpson, office staff of all town departments for their time and cooperation throughout the year. Your name should be in there as well. Say it says respectfully submitted, and then all of our names are under that. That's to go in the annual town meeting report. And I'm sitting here with a whole bunch of copies and reading it to you. Don't mind me. It's been a really long day today.
I've seen more work today than you've seen.
Anytime you sit in a room for 5 hours with an attorney, it's a tough
Don't go there, Roy.
tough 5
Don't
hours.
go there.
Okay, I guess for the record, we should probably put a motion on the table to accept the document that's prepared by the office to submit to the selectmen as a report of the planning board for 2021.
I'll make a motion.
With the noted, second with the noted changes, yeah.
Yeah, so I've got a motion, Lawler, and a second, Riley, with the changes that were noted during the reading. To forward that report to the Board of Selectmen for our report for 2021 for annual town meeting, annual town report. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We'll show that as a unanimous vote of 7 in favor and none opposed. And I, for the record, want to offer the board's thanks for Lindy Snow for the time that he served on the planning board. I think, as most of the board knows, Lindy is not planning on running for a regular member seat for next session, which would start after annual town election in May. Lindy has offered, and I'm sure he will follow through on his offer, to ask for an appointment as associate member after his term is officially expired, after we've sworn in a new member. So, and I think most of the board knows that the current 2 slots up for election would be Lindy Snow's slot. Our current associate member, Kevin Riley, has pulled nomination papers for that slot. And Rob Ken's slot, who filled in for a 1-year term to fill a vacancy, is up for re-election to a full term this year. The assumption is that both of those members will turn in their nomination papers on time and be on the ballot for the 2021 annual town election. And again, I want to pass our thanks on, Lindy, for the time you've served on the board. And given that, I think at this point in time, we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion.
So that's a motion, Lawler. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion, Lawler.
It was in stereo.
I guess we'll give that second to Hanley.
There you go.
Because I heard 2 or 3 voices simultaneously there, so. All those in favor of the motion to adjourn at, we'll call it 8:25 PM, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, thank you all.